taking alone the responsibility of managing a tremendously huge potential flows of migrants coming to north to the European shores. The Italian shores are European shores. That's why we have been asking Europe for taking action, initiative for managing and coordinating the issue.
So let me be clear, are you saying that you will still maintain this policy of refusing to accept asylum seekers or refugees into Italy?
Well, Italy will face the impact of potential migratory flows. It is absolutely clear. We did so 2 weeks ago with 6,000 migrants coming from Tunisia. But that said, Europe as a whole, the responsibility of managing flows. Italy is absolutely clear, alone cannot afford enormous flows of migrants. We are asking for European solidarity. We are in talks with European colleagues about that.
Is it true, the rumour that appears to be going around Brussels, that Italy is making its participation in the EU sanctions programme, or its support for that EU sanctions programme, conditional upon a broader EU agreement on the issue of immigrants?
No, these are two different points. One thing is the full implementation of European and UN sanctions, and we will be fully implementing UN and European sanctions. Other thing is to have a European discussion on migration. We have been talking about that for a very long time.
What do you think your position should be on this? I mean, I've been looking at the numbers about migration. At the end of 2009, Germany had a refugee population of 594,000. Italy had a refugee population of 55,000, less even than Sweden, which is a much smaller country.
Well, Italy took a huge number of migrants. We have, unfortunately, a large number of illegal migrants coming to Sicily and then moving north to the other regions of Italy. We are bearing the burden of people that violate international and European law.
I don't understand what you mean when you say you're bearing the burden. As I say, the figures show that Italy's refugee population is much, much smaller than many of the European countries.
Well, but the territory, the density of the population in Italy is much higher, and so we want to respect European legislation. European legislation is very clear. What we can accept is to have a regular migrant flows management. This is what we want, and this is what we accept.
I'm sorry, look, I just want to be very clear on this, if I could push you on this. I mean, Italy is one of the 4 biggest countries in Europe. It has 6 times the population of Sweden, and yet Sweden still has more migrants. So I'm not quite sure how you're working your calculations as to density and bearing the burden of immigration, as you were putting it.
Well, on the basis of all the public figures we have, but one simple fact is very clear. Italy is by far the country that has been saving lives and rescuing the hugest number of migrants in need on Mediterranean. We saved thousands and thousands and thousands of human lives, and we are very proud of it.
You say that you will agree with and enforce all the EU sanctions announced. Let me just ask you what you're doing in terms of investments, in terms of assets related to Libya. Your relationship business-wise and financially with Libya much closer than any other European nation. The deal that was struck with Libya just a few years ago in 2008 provided for $5 billion in investments into Libya over 20 years. Is that part of the deal also going to be suspended? Are you going to ask for that money back? How are you going to manage this need for a freeze on assets of the regime?
Well, we are absolutely ready. I said already that Italy will support all the sanctions that will be decided on the economic field, on financial field from UN and from the European Union. We are discussing now what kind of sanctions, but all kind of sanctions will be agreed by Italy.
But have you frozen all the assets that you know are related to Libya?
There are. I don't know in details what kind of assets, but whatever it will be, Italy will agree and will implement in full the sanctions.
Italy has been historically very close to Libya, as we know, and your current Prime Minister, Mr. Berlusconi, has been very close to Mr. Gaddafi, as we know. Are you willing and able to do what the UK has done and remove his diplomatic immunity?
We can discuss together, because this is an initiative that should be taken at European level. We have no problems at all, because since we adopted a travel ban, we have no problems of Libyan regime people entering the Italian territory. So we have no need to remove what it doesn't longer exist, that is diplomatic immunity, since they cannot simply enter the Italian territory.
Well, I'm just wondering whether, because of the relationship between the two countries, Italy might consider or entertain the idea of providing Mr. Gaddafi with some kind of refuge.
No, we don't take even into consideration the idea. It is excluded.
All right. You talk about trying to build democracy, and we've heard lots of fine words from the UN members gathered there and supporting the democracy. And as we've pointed out, it's a little bit too late, but nonetheless probably welcome to a lot of people in Libya. My question is, how are you going to do that? What can you in Italy do to make sure that the next generation of Libyan leaders is not as bad as this one?
Well, first of all, we want to reach out to the opponents of the current regime. We have a good knowledge of people living outside of Libya that are resisting to the regime, that have been resisting. We could offer some good opportunities like students' exchanges, I would say scholarships. We can help, but in full respect of the ownership. It will be the Libyan people who will decide about its destiny.
And the sanctions that we have seen already, as announced by the EU and by the United Nations, do you think they go far enough? I mean, you have mentioned recently the possibility of no-fly zones. You have mentioned using your military bases in some context. Give us a little bit more detail as to how much more do you think is going to be necessary to get Gaddafi out?
It depends on what the international community will be discussing, because we have been discussing about the so-called no-fly zone. To have a no-fly zone which would be an extremely useful instrument to prevent the regime from bombarding, from using helicopters and planes, this is a measure that we could adopt, provided that we are absolutely sure the international community is ready to enforce. In my talks with France, with UK, with Germany, with United States, I understood at this stage discussions are not ready for adopting a measure like no-fly zone, while it's necessary to continue to explore all the legal and practical consequences. I've already said Italy would have military bases, but what about the rest, the practical enforcement?
And that's effectively what I'm trying to ask you with respect, because what we have had so far all along the line have been, I guess, a lot of evasions leading to mild condemnation, leading to the understanding that something needs to be done, leading to big condemnation, leading to sanctions, if I can characterize the past 10 days or so in that manner. And yet what we haven't seen is anything really practical that will give us an idea of what the future is going to look like and give us an idea of exactly what role you can play in making sure that this situation doesn't occur again, that we don't see Africa, the North African states that are in trouble, relapsing into a situation where you have human rights regimes that don't respect their citizens being supported by Westerners.
Well, I think what is necessary, I said, is necessary for Mediterranean region. We should launch as soon as possible a new pact for stability, prosperity and democracy of European and non-European Mediterranean states working together. What we talk about is a Marshall Plan for economic development, helping promoting democracy and human rights. And of course, for the moment, what is necessary is the full implementation of international sanctions. We just adopted UN sanctions. We are about to adopt European sanctions, and all the European member states should fully implement.
You talk about a Marshall Plan, and that's come also from a number of other European politicians as well. But the Marshall Plan, as we know, was a government-led plan. It was public money being used to support Europe at the time of post-war crisis. Europe doesn't have that kind of money in the public purse to give away at this stage. How would this pact of yours work?
Well, Europe does. I'm sorry to interrupt. Europe does. Europe should coordinate much better the existing instruments, because Italy alone has proposed to open a new lines of credit for Egypt of more than 100 million euros only at bilateral level, and we did the same with Tunisia. Europe as a whole promised so far to mobilize just 17 million for Tunisia and something more for Egypt. So Europe should find much more money to have a more coordinated approach. If there is a political will, Europe can succeed.
And from Italy's perspective then, what are you prepared to donate to this?
Well, Italy will be continuing to support all the practical initiative to relaunch economic development and launch economic plans for all these countries that are in a transitional phase towards democracy. I did so in Egypt, I've done so with Tunisia. We are ready to do so, but bilateral level is not enough. We need Europe, and we need more than Europe. We need a coordinated international effort. That's why I talked about a Marshall Plan.
All right. Again, I'd like to ask you about Italy's contribution to all of this, and let me put a very specific question to you.
I said, it is very clear. It is very clear. I repeated what I've already said. Italy offered to Tunisia more than 100 million euros, and more than that to Egypt, alone at bilateral level.
Let me put a specific question to you about the immigration situation. Now, this appears to be one of the things that concerns Italy more than any other. How many, if any, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers are you prepared to take if the situation in Libya continues and escalates?
Well, it is impossible to say. We are helping people with humanitarian assistance in the countries that are concerned. Egypt if necessary, Tunisia if necessary. We are waiting for a concerted and coordinated European approach. We are ready to face the first impact.
And as far as the overall European and international response is concerned, I know that you had a phone conversation with Hillary Clinton some days ago. Are you sensing that overall we are moving towards the possibility of intervention in Libya?
Not for the moment, as far as I understand. It will be possible to move on an humanitarian assistance mission to be enforced from the international community. I'm not talking about a military intervention. A
military intervention perhaps not, but would you be willing to throw your weight behind the idea of this no-fly zone that you and so many other people have skirted around to a certain extent?
That's why I said that no-fly zone is still under discussion, because if you decide a no-fly zone, you have to enforce it through military means is necessary.
All right. Mr. Frattini, thank you very much indeed for talking to Al Jazeera.
Bye-bye.
And thank you also for joining us on this edition of Talk to Al Jazeera. Bye-bye.
Hello again. It's still very cold for many of us in the northern parts of Asia. The winds are still coming down from the north, dragging in that fresh air.